Hi guys, my last video got a few comments, got a few likes, definitely butchered them. So I had to cut up the videos because it took hours to download, and so I had to do each video, and then that's really annoying, and then editing 9 videos instead of one big video. Hopefully this one will be shorter, and then I'll just eventually get better at editing. That topic was a little ambiguous, but I figured I would start with that one because that was just a big topic, just to get the whole channel rolling. It was easy to, with anecdotal experience, I could talk about it a lot easier. Today, I want to talk about philosophy, just an intro to philosophy or philosophy 101 type thing. I had to do a little more research outside of my just domain of knowledge. Just as a starter for philosophy, and then the continuation of this channel, that'll be really useful. It's useful in general. Anybody that has just a general interest in philosophy or is planning on doing philosophy. So there's six branches of philosophy. You have epistemology, logic, metaphysics, ethics, aesthetics, and then political philosophy. And the overall view of philosophy is, I mean, it's gonna be really hard. And then philosophy is the point of seeing what is exactly right. But generally, I think you can chalk philosophy up to essentially epistemology, or what we know and why we know it, and what more can we know, and what is true. How do we know that it's true? Things of that nature. So, starting with epistemology, just the study of knowledge, in essence. What is it? How is knowledge acquired? What do people know? How do we know what we know? What would be an example? Say there's values and presumed ideas that we accept. A lot of things we can challenge, especially the smarter you are, you can challenge a lot of fundamental things that you've believed and realize they're not necessarily true. But then, what about even further? What about the basis that you've established that those things are wrong? How are you using your system to know that that is wrong? How can you know? It's absolute skepticism. The whole Descartes, Hume, a lot of those Enlightenment era philosophers, this was really when things started to kick off, because although Aristotle was great, and Socrates and all those guys, Pythagoras, all those Greek philosophers, they were ahead of their time. I mean, that was 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, and they really were just transcendental in bringing society and thinking further. And then there really was no great movement since then until the Enlightenment period, which is really amazing. The Romans didn't really have the philosophers comparable at all, until the Enlightenment era, like I said. The problem with a lot of Aristotle's ideas and Socrates and all that, there were still so many assumed premises or assumptions about how to think. Like, we know that this is true. We don't even have to challenge it. We know it's so true. The simplest one is religions, or the gods. At that time, for the Greeks, it would have been the gods. Or the assumption that good and evil exists. That it's so deep that we just assume that it's true, because we build everything upon it. And so you have to go through so many layers to get down to how you think about the world. The lens with which it's one thing to challenge things looking through your lens. You can challenge a lot of things like that, see what's true and what's not. But then if you're able to get to the actual lens with which you're viewing the world through, that is kind of where the depth of epistemology takes you. That's deep. And I think, in my opinion, I think you do have to be quite the intellectual and quite the rational to actually be able to do that. If you're an emotional type, you're not going to challenge the lens with which you see things. Don't make this a blanket statement, but generally it's going to be way more difficult for a feeler to challenge that, because they're essentially challenging the world that they live in. You have your own world in your brain, and that's going to be really hard to just throw that world out and then say things are this. That's so difficult. But that's what like guys like Voltaire, Machiavelli, these guys just absolute skeptics, and it's like, what can we know that is true? And you just can't. You can't. And then Kant comes along and with the metaphysics, kind of putting metaphysics on the back burner, because it's like, we just can't know. And that's not even provable. We can't know that there are a metaphysical realm or a metaphysical ideology. We can't know if there is one or not. Say, like, metaphysics as in, like, there's ethics and gods or a higher being, stuff like that. We'll come back around to epistemology. Next is logic. So inductive and deductive are the main categories for logic, mainly. Let's start with deductive. Deductive logic is things that have to be true within themselves. So it can't rain and not rain simultaneously, right? That's just illogical. It's a paradox. It can't do that. All black cats are black. That's logical. It's not necessarily true, because all cats aren't black, but all cats that are black, right? It sounds simple, but that is how deductive logic works, because it is 100% true as far as logic and words go. There are also, you have valid statements, and you have true statements, and then you have false statements, and then you have obviously invalid. So if you get a statement that is valid, logically valid, say all purple cats are purple, that is logically valid. That is a valid argument, although it is not a true statement, because we obviously don't have purple cats. So if it meets the two categories of validity and true, that makes it a sound argument. There's two categories that make it a sound argument. You have to have validity, and it has to be true. So I could say all black cats are black, and because we do actually have black cats, that's true, and then it's also logically valid, thus making it a sound argument. Now, if I only make it to where all purple cats are purple, that makes it a valid argument, but not a sound, full argument. So the best arguments are obviously going to be the ones that are sound, where it meets both categories. Now the second part of logic is inductive logic. Is the argument inductively forceful? I can say about a coin, I predict that this coin will be around 50-50 as far as heads versus tails when we flip it. You can't be 100%, but you're gonna it's gonna be a high probability. You can say the chances are, if you're driving around on ice for hours and hours, or in your life, you're eventually gonna hit something or bump something. The probability for that is high. Say another one would be, if you drive your car 60 hours a week, you're substantially more likely to get into an accident of some sort. Now, it's obviously not 100% true, but it's inductively forceful. It's like, yes, that makes sense, even though it's not absolutely true within itself. What would be another example? If you jump so many feet, say 20 feet, 30 feet, there's a high likelihood you break a bone. Now, there's obviously been people that have not broken a bone from jumping that far, but there's obviously been a lot more that have. So it's inductively forceful. It's more like percentages and probability. That's how inductive logic will work. But it obviously is not the same as deductive, because deductive is just black or white, whereas inductive is starts getting into the gray area with probability. The next thing is metaphysics. Two categories there, ontology and cosmology. Ontology, the nature of being and the relations within the universe. And then cosmology, origin and development of the universe and fate, what there is. So yeah, that sounds the same. They sound the same, right? But because ontology is things that are within the universe already, and where we fit in, what is the nature of things. And then cosmology is like similar, but it more looks at the origin of the universe. What is the development to this? And they're obviously going to overlap, so that's why it makes metaphysics. Ontology, is there gods? Is there not? Are we gods? What is our place? What is our role? Cosmology, what is the origin? Was there a God that created the world? Did we just spawn out of something that nothing exists? Are we just a brain in a vat, like Descartes' exercise example? So that's the nature of metaphysics. there's a ton of metaphysicians, especially in the Enlightenment era, where we just didn't really, we had a lot of assumed premises. And so we kind of assumed these things were just automatically true, like the idea of good and evil. That would have been in the realm of metaphysics. We were trying to study Descartes' whole argument for God and establishing something indubitably true. All metaphysics, because it's obviously not a physical, and it's more abstract in the brain, mind, spirit idea. The next one is ethics, moral philosophy, justice, right and wrong. What is the right way? So here I wanted to make a distinction, because ethics, we want to make it, we try to synonymize it with religion or virtue morality, whereas ethics, it doesn't have to be necessarily religious. Say I'm studying psychology, so we have the APA guidelines or code of ethics, and so certain studies or experiments, you can't like cut people's legs off and see how it's going to go, right? There's a code of ethics, but it's not necessarily a virtuous, it doesn't make you some great person. It's just like, we just can't do that. It's just, that's not going to be productive overall. The greater good. That's kind of a difference. If you can get a religious philosophy where it's not necessarily the greater good to do something, but it's still ordained by whatever religion or being, entity with which they worship. And so that entity ordains that something, this is objectively good and you must do this, right? I'm going to go with Christianity here. So lying would be wrong according to the ethics of Christianity. However, it's not black and white. Sometimes, what if you have to lie and it saves somebody's life, which has probably happened multiple times. That's where you start getting hazy. Is that objectively good to just not lie? That's kind of how we take it, but it's clear that it's not true. And you can decipher what God says and this and that, but it's pretty evident deception is wrong according to the values of Christianity. Now, utilitarianism would be an ethical system that's not religious, and it is just the greatest good or the least bad for the community or the whole, right? Christianity is generally, it will go that way. Generally, it will be the greatest good, but there's obviously a ton of time when it is not the greatest good for the whole. So utilitarianism, that was Jeremy Bentham's idea. You have Kant's categorical imperative, which is similar to utilitarianism, but with the axiom or maxim that you're seeking, if you want to seek, say you want to beat people up, and that at that time is your ethical system, you'll do whatever that ethical system requires, or whatever that maxim, whatever it takes to get to that maxim is that will be your code of ethics. That would be the categorical imperative. So if I want to beat people up, that's my maxim at that point. I'm going to get really strong. I'm going to start working out. I'm going to take martial arts. That's going to be my code of ethics at that point. So Kant's idea is just one size fits all. And I think that was his point. That in that point, in his categorical imperative, utilitarianism would work. If that's your maxim, you want to seek the greatest good for the whole. Christianity, if you want to serve God, then that's your maxim, and then you'll follow the values of that system. The problem with utilitarianism is, or any for that matter, what is the greatest good for the whole? Can you define that? Well, people not dying. Why is that necessarily good? So you get into that problem with utilitarianism. You get into that problem with every religion. Why is that happen to be right? Why is you could say, for like a humanist perspective, that out of just mere observance, not trying to define or presume anything, we clearly have an avoidance of death. We have a survivalist instinct, and you can look through all the animal kingdom and it's the same as well. So that's where you can say, just what we observe, this is obviously what we do, and then we'll try to obviously avoid death. And that's all we've done throughout history, is just get better at not dying. And we're smarter, we live longer than we ever have before, so. But still identifying what, obviously it doesn't just go to death as for the greater good. Say you have a court case or a lawsuit. What is the greater good in that case where nobody's actually going to die? It's like, how is that good? Maybe 20 years from now, you don't know how that's going to go. that could be very different in the future. You think it's really good right now, but can you predict 20 years from now how it's going to look? Maybe somebody learns a lesson and it changes their life and they're a completely different person, and now for those next 15 years they're making the world an entirely better place. You can't know. But generally, utilitarianism isn't an effective system. Generally, there are its problems. You can look that up. Problems with utilitarianism, pros and cons. The fifth one, aesthetics. So the nature of beauty, judgments of sentiment, taste, or preference. You might ask why aesthetics is within philosophy. Isn't that an art thing? Well, there's a philosophy of art. Art is, it's like, why is this thing beautiful? According to you, is it objectively beautiful? Is it subjectively beautiful? Is everything arbitrary, or is some things arbitrary and some objective? You can't know. That was kind of, it's obvious, like emotional music affects us and it's really beautiful to us, or movies that are really, movies really move us. It's obviously some art that affects us somehow. What is it? What is that thing within it? Or what is the collection of things that makes that thing beautiful? So aesthetics is a little simpler. It's just trying to figure out why the hell things are beautiful and what is beautiful, and trying to figure it out on an objective level, not a subjective level. Because we can obviously find stuff that we know we like, but that's not necessarily true for everyone. What can we find that everyone finds equally beautiful? The last part is political philosophy. It's liberty, justice, property, rights, law, and enforcement of such by what authority? Like, who is free? Why are we free? Do we know that we're free? If you believe in God, you think all men are created equal, blah, 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 blah. Problem with that, though, is there's a paradox when people are not created equal, and you have the disciples and these prophets and apostles, stuff like that. Quite the contradiction. However, what is justice? Maybe one light, this form of justice is really actually good, whereas if you do the same thing here, it turns out really bad in the future. You can't know. What the hell is justice? Is it retributive justice? Is that what's good? So if someone does something wrong, you gotta punish them. That just sounds like revenge. No, it's because they did something wrong. They have to be, why? Generally, is retributive justice effective? You're just getting back at that person. You're okay, justified way of, but they did something wrong. We have a system. It's justice. It's right. It's good. God said so. Not necessarily. You have so many assumed premises there. So if God doesn't exist, if your system is based on a bunch of lies based on that God, then now what is your argument? So now everything you just told me is an assumed idea. No bueno. Not an effective argument. Property, rights, and law. So property and rights go back to the liberty thing. Are we free as people? And then what is our property? John Locke was a big proponent of this, and he tried to define a category, but still, like, in a natural evolutionary perspective, it's like we are just things and events, and you're not necessarily owning anything. You can temporarily, and according to our system, and it tends to work out better for everybody that we have things specified, like we shouldn't murder, we shouldn't steal everything, and so you kind of develop a system because that's most effective, that's most adaptable. But it's still really hard to define. What do you own? Why can you own that? Why can you not own this? Why that? Why that? And then you have the intellectual property with the whole internet thing. That really gets confusing. It's like you're not allowed to think or say what you're thinking about this idea or write about that thing. Because you only learn from hearing people talk. So when your teacher taught you this thing, now, like, that would essentially fulfill the role of intellectual property. Can you not utter? Big problem. And now, who's to be in charge and enforce all this authority? It gets tough. It seems to work out okay. I don't think it's a perfect system. I think it works well, but after millions of years of... But as far as language adapting, 50,000 years ago, who is to be in charge? Why? And I think it just goes back to evolution. Who's going to be the most intelligent? Who's going to be the strongest? They're going to be in charge. And that's how it always goes. Most money means generally most intelligence, but that means they're the most adaptable to get where they are. But that also means people are seeking power, people are seeking status, but those people are going to bring the society forward. Bill Gates has done so much for the world that hundreds of millions of people combined wouldn't have been able to contribute what Bill Gates. Yeah, but you can't contribute to the relationships, and it's like that has a zero value, essentially. Zero. Because what you end up doing is dying, and then those little relationships get forgotten. And then imagine in 1,000 years, nobody even knows who you were. Those relationships meant nothing. Whereas Bill Gates moved the entire society forward. Guys like Tesla, guys like great philosophers moved the world forward. Isaac Newton, Einstein, these guys moved the world forward. And they were the most brilliant. And they made the world better for everybody. They made everybody more adaptable. The more you know, the better you survive. The more you know, the further into the future you can look. Mathematically, Einstein, we just found out there was a black hole. We were able to actually get an image of it. Einstein was able to predict that, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, mathematically. And so that's logic. That's just one giant long line of logic, and that's what math can do, which is amazing. To predict a black hole, nobody ever saw one until then. We thought it existed because based on logic. That does take me back to logic. There is mathematical logic. 2 plus 2 is 4. That logically makes sense. If you have 2 items plus 2 more items, that gives you some number, but there's double what you have, so that makes 4. Yeah. Mathematical logic, there's a whole thing on that. But this is just intro. I didn't want to go too deep into all that. So that's the political. Kind of got off on a tangent there. So it really does all come back to epistemology. All of those things come back to knowledge. And that's why it would probably be the first branch. And then I think the combination of logic and epistemology can fulfill all of those. Epistemology is knowledge, the study of knowledge, why we know, what do we know, what can we know, why is it true? And logic enters when we're trying to discover if it's true. Is this the next step, or are we just making this up in our mind? Really tough. So I think that's it, guys. Just a short, I think it's relatively short. Not sure how long the video went. I'm going to try to get some more content, maybe some more philosophy stuff, maybe some psychology stuff. I hope this video comes out better than my last one. But give it some likes, give it some subscribes. I'll see you guys next time.